here we go. 3, 2, 1, start streaming. All right. Hello, everyone. This is Reimagining Star Wars, and tonight we have a special guest, Revan. So thank you for coming, and I'm going to play the intro right quick, and then we're going to get right into the news. We're going to skip Resistance this time, and then we're going to talk about a few things that's near and dear to his Revan's heart, and then we'll carry that through for the hour. So here we go. Reimagining Star Wars. All right, everyone. Welcome to Reimagining Star Wars with Revan. And
hello, everybody.
Hello, Revan. This is Darth Revan here, and he's gonna lay some wisdom down. If you don't know, Darth Revan is responsible through his teachings for the rule of two. I know that most people think it's Bane, but Bane based his philosophy off of Revan. So so he may have taken it and ran with it and gave the Sith 1,000 years of planning that resulted in Palpatine becoming the Sith Emperor and ruling the galaxy. But if it had not been for Revan, it would have never have happened. So with that, we'll let Revan open up with what we want to talk about, which is the first thing is KOTOR.
All right. Yeah. So KOTOR. So we'd been discussing earlier on how a lot of different things had been leading into the potential for a KOTOR trilogy. First it was the D&D directors that were supposed to be directing some sort of Old Republic trilogy. And a Magic Maker had been sharing with me some of his thoughts and his insight on, how this could potentially still be going on, just very subtly. So do you want to go ahead and lay down some of that? Just some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think we can kind of see a pattern. Is that apart from Kathleen Kennedy, what has been released into the public sphere from Lucasfilm has actually been a couple of months in the making. So if we take it back all the way back to the summer of 2018, when the height of all the backlash was coming in and Solo had failed, and we started hearing rumors that Kathleen Kennedy was no longer going to be part of Lucasfilm. But then we found out in September that she was extended and her contract was extended, but though it was a secret, like it was never released. It snuck out, and we heard Iger say that he's now the one calling the shots, that the buck stops with him. It was in that summer that most likely Kathleen Kennedy, ceased to be anything more than figuratively in charge of Lucasfilm. And then of course we start getting some trickle of news where we find Filoni and Favreau are forming our first Disney Plus show, Star Wars show, which was The Mandalorian. And then we from there we have we get some more information that's coming out, and so sorry, Vega just walked in, kind of messed up my train of thought. So let me get back on path. But yeah, so so in that time frame, we have Favreau and Filoni coming on. We get some and that leads us into the next information. Then we, and of course we've already, and during that time we had found out just before all the big stuff was happening. I forgot to tell that the D&D was coming on that summer, really before the hammer of everything started falling with Solo. Mm-hmm. We found out that D&D was coming on to do their own trilogy, and we're thinking, oh, thank God, that means that Ryan may not be getting his trilogy. I think that was all around the time. And of course, then the numbers at Solo started doing awful, and which was fairly quickly known, but that was right around the time that we were getting distracted by the D&D coming on, right? And D.B. Weiss and Benioff and David Benioff, and so so that's like the first news started coming out. So we're like, oh well, at least we're getting them and not Rian Johnson. So we're like okay, and then of course we're told that Rian Johnson still has his trilogy. So we're thinking 2 trilogies, okay. And of course, Solo tanks. Iger comes out saying we're not getting any more anthology films, and so that all that is occurring. And then come there was one other detail I wanted to cover, but I can't remember what it was. But so anyway, come April, so all this information is coming out. Like I said, they didn't leak. They had to leak. It was not announced that Kathleen Kennedy was extended, and when everybody thought she was gone. So somewhere or another, they figured out, hey, they had to balance this in a PR manner. So Favreau and Filoni are announced fall of 2018. The Rise of Skywalker is in full tilt filming. It hasn't been announced what it's about. We know that they're filming. A ton of little rumors are coming out about what's happening.
Yeah,
that they were
lots of different leaks and stuff.
Right, and we of course find out that it's still in chaos as they're trying to fix what was left of them by the Last Jedi. So so they're still trying to figure that mess out, and I think they've gotten a pretty good handle on it now. But I think at the time they didn't know where they were going to go, because I think they're, even though JJ has come out, didn't really mess it up. It did mess it up, and they weren't exactly sure how to play it out. And,
so how does this play into the potential for KOTOR?
So what now? So the next bit is they go, okay, we're going to finish this out. Let JJ have his thing. So we find out that so we go into Celebration in April, and in Celebration we have Kathleen Kennedy is asked about KOTOR, and so then what she says is, "Oh yeah, we're working on some stuff, and we're talking with D&D, David and Dan, and we're talking with Ryan, and we're all sitting down. We're going to discuss the future of Star Wars." And nowhere is Michelle named, nowhere is Rejwan named in that. Nowhere is anything else, any other person named in the course of that. Well, lo and behold, in May we find out that Laeta Kalogridis, who is the writer of or co-writer of Alita: Battle Angel, and has a bunch of other sci-fi credentials behind her as well, is writing the KOTOR, the first script for the KOTOR trilogy. All right, and so and that she was nearing completion. Not that she's writing it, but just writing it. She's nearing completion of it. All right.
Okay.
And then a couple of weeks after that, we found out that Michelle Rejwan, who has been J.J. Abrams' right-hand lady, as it were, is coming on as the senior vice president of live-action films and series.
So the KOTOR, the Knights of the Old Republic series, no matter what form that takes, is definitely happening.
Yeah, I think it's going to definitely happen. So let me kind of lay out this, where I'm trying to go, and I guess I am taking a long time, but so let me hurry up and get through it. So she's coming on. She comes on. And the reason why that's important is because, like I was saying, what's happening is things are coming out months. So the decisions are made, and then months later it's revealed under Iger. It's not revealed immediately like it was under Kathleen Kennedy. Everything, every snap decision under Kathleen Kennedy was revealed like quickly. There was no thought process into the reveals. But that hasn't been true since Iger has taken back the reins of Lucasfilm.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of letting things play out. So he's playing it safe. So he's not coming out and firing anybody directly. He's not making any rash decisions. He's letting things kind of play out, even though decisions may have been made months before. So we find out that in recent days that in May, same time that we're talking, then the reports that Laeta Kalogridis, on her writing the KOTOR, it said specifically in those reports that this was separate from the D&D trilogy. All right.
Okay.
So meaning that they were not related. This is not their trilogy. This is not what they were writing, which I did not catch back then. I don't know if anybody did really, but it's right in the report.
Yeah.
I was reading, I was going, how did I miss this? And so this was something separate. So this leads to, and like we said, we're having this slow play out of information. And today, of course, we found out that in May is when D&D were let go with all the backlash that happened with the Game of Thrones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were like, boom, off the side. I guess maybe Iger was willing to give him a chance, but as soon as that happened, it was like, boom, I don't need this. We don't need this issue. But I actually think it wasn't even Iger. I actually think that my personal opinion is that Feige's actually been in guidance or helping Iger kind of guide
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars at this point. I think this has been going on for a while. I think Favreau came on with Filoni as a result of Feige basically asking Favreau to come in and help right the ship at Star Wars or with Star Wars.
All right.
And so this is where we're getting to. So now what we know is KOTOR is one of the most beloved non-canon pieces of Star Wars that's out there.
Content, yeah.
And so we know that Filoni loves KOTOR. And in fact, he loves Revan. And in the third season, which I think is coming into play with it's going to come into play in this Rise of the Skywalker. But we know that in the third season of the Clone Wars, we had the Alter Mortis Ghost
Mortis
Wars,
arc.
the Mortis arc.
Mm-hmm.
And in that arc, he wanted to bring Revan into that arc to make him canon.
Yep.
Of course, it didn't happen. And but we know that, and that was only when it was only like 7 years old, right? And so it was still fresh on everybody's mind. And so that was his plan. So I mean, I think they know how beloved the Knights of the Old Republic is, and how beloved Revan is. So I mean, there's so many awesome characters in that thing. I mean, Bastila Shan is an awesome character. I mean, and as you go through these pieces, it's just a really good telling of the story.
Yeah. So I definitely think that the KOTOR series is happening one way or another, or at least an Old Republic series. And my money is on the fact that they will bring in Revan somehow. Now, I do have my own personal opinions on whether I think they should or not, and even if they do, how they should tell his story. But I definitely think it's going to happen, though I'm not sure how well it will actually be received by fans. In fact, I think I'm more in the category that's a bit more reserved. I think most fans would be quite excited to get a trilogy based on Revan and based on the Old Republic or any Old Republic characters. And honestly, I think it's a smart move by Disney. They've been focusing a lot of their potential on the era between episodes 3 and 4, with Rogue One, Solo. They already got 2 films there, Rebels, a TV show, all within that era, as well as they're really just trying to push a lot of this sequel content to pad the sequel movies with Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and
Right.
Rise of Skywalker.
I think they know they got to get out of this. I mean, they got to close it out.
They're needing to go somewhere new, which is evidently you go the total opposite direction with the Old Republic, which has always really been a largely unaffected time period within the Star Wars universe. Like unaffected as in it's separate from the movie eras, with
Right.
very few things really contributing directly.
Right. It's really hard to screw up continuity when you're working in the Old Republic era, just because it's there's story wise people won't see disconnects.
Right. It's thousands of years before the events of the movies.
Right.
So I think there's a few key elements that they'll need to hit no matter what they do. I think the first thing that a lot of people, including myself, first noticed whenever they heard of the Old Republic trilogy is the question of, oh, there were thousands of Sith at one point? What was that like? Because, all we see in the films is that there's 2 Sith. there's the master and the apprentice. And if you watch the Clone Wars and stuff like that, there's very few, but never like the Jedi where they have full armies of Sith. So that's a point that a lot of fans who want to get into the Old Republic, it really sparks their interest.
Right, and so at one point there was thousands of Jedi versus thousands of Sith, and so that's got to play out. I mean, so there's going to be some portion of that, and the Mandalorian's going to come into play.
Definitely. It's already been referenced in Rebels by Sabine and Kanan that there was a Mandalorian war between the Jedi and the Mandalorians, where the Jedi did come out on top, which in the Legends and KOTOR continuity, Revan played a very pivotal role.
Right. And we've also gone to Malachor 5, even though that it was slightly different in Rebels than it was in.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, slightly different, but they also had a super weapon there.
Right.
Or at least the implied super weapon with the Sith Temple freezing all those people.
Correct.
So they're definitely taking inspiration from the Old Republic. Question is, will they do something wholly original, or how much will they rely on the previous stories? So what do you think is going to happen?
I think that they're going to pull, mostly what they're going to pull in is the previous story. So I think they'll have to make some changes, of course, but I think that the situation is such that they're going to try to stay as close to what they know is successful as possible, and so I think that's pretty important in the scheme of things. So we do have Santa on here actually. So but he's coming through. I mean, we know that Santa has been spending some time with Mrs. Claus before going off to do Christmas stuff and get everything prepped for Christmas. So we want to wish you a happy anniversary there, Santa, and that we hope that everything is super smooth and you'll be able to get all your presents ready for Christmas.
Yep.
So is there anything else that you think is relevant? Well, I mean, I guess the last aspect of that is that I just think that with what we've learned here recently is that especially with Feige coming in, and we know he's going to produce a film. That was the other piece of information that dropped that I didn't talk about. Mm-hmm. But the relationship between Feige and Favreau is kind of the aspect that I think is really the key of all of this. That they're prepping Filoni. I don't think Filoni is directing Mandalorian because of just because it'd be nice. I think they're prepping him for doing a larger role. I don't know if Favreau wants it. I think Favreau has a really successful career, and I think he enjoys doing other things. But Filoni has staked his career in Star Wars, and so I think that that's the direction that they'll want him to stay.
Yeah, and, I believe that the majority of fans would easily accept Filoni. I don't think I think I have my own opinions on the guy. But I won't deny that he's definitely contributed some very positive aspects to the Star Wars universe in building a broader scope of the world.
Right, I would agree. I mean, has his development been perfect? No, I mean there's been some hits and misses in the things that he's done, but I think ultimately he is a good fit for where we're at in Star Wars. And maybe he'll bring in. It tells me that if he loves Revan, that there's a good chance that he loves a lot of the other EU, and so I expect it to come in. I mean, one of the things you don't have now, and with the Clone Wars is Lucas standing over Filoni, telling him what he can and can't do.
Mm-hmm. Which almost might be a good thing. So Filoni can really deviate and kind of make his own sort of canon and continuity the way that he wants it, which I guess for better or worse allows a lot more freedom.
Right. I think if Filoni can come in and kind of Feige Star Wars, I think we'll have a much better situation. I mean, I think he knows the feel of what Star Wars should be, and yet he's not. I mean, of course, George created Star Wars. I mean, he's the really the go-to for it all. But at the same time, he has always been kind of finicky and unsettled in his mind. So he changes his mind on what aspects of Star Wars all the time, and so that matters. So you want to say something, Vega?
Sorry for dropping in so late. What are we talking about again? I wasn't here before because I had to play with little Ren. He's a little terror.
That's all right. We were just discussing the potential for the Old Republic, as well as some of the developments behind the scenes. We were just wrapping it up, and we're going to move into the next topic here pretty soon. But before we do that, do you have anything you'd like to say about the Old Republic, Vega?
Is there anything you want to talk about with the Old Republic? You haven't really played the game as much as we have, so you may not be really familiar with it. And we started it, but we didn't really get going into it.
Yeah, because I don't think we didn't play it enough, and I didn't get that interested.
So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of distracting when you have a bunch of other stuff like homework to take you away, and then friends come over that don't like it when they want to play video games.
And I'm just like,
I
want to throw homework in the trash can. That's what I think, and I think it's illegal.
All right. So with that, should we go ahead and transition to the next topic? Laws of Canon.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go to Laws of Canon, and I think you have a bunch of questions, and I will attempt to answer them.
And I'll try if I have the chance.
So let's go ahead and go over the Laws of Canon, just for those that might not know. The first Law of Canon, or first of all, Magic Maker, what would you say the purpose of these Laws of Canon that you have constructed is? What's the purpose for them?
I think it's really just a response to at first it was just a response to Doomcock, right? And as he established these laws of canon in an attempt to declare why Disney isn't canon, right? But really what comes down to is that there are some laws of canon. Like there's some things that kind of define why people rebel or reject certain things. I mean, that we saw a rejection of Lucas's work with the prequels, right? And so you have to ask yourself, why did that occur? I mean, did it occur really because Jar Jar was in there? I mean, that we hated Jar Jar, so therefore that we don't like prequel Star Wars. And then why don't we like Attack of the Clones? Because there's very little Jar Jar in Attack of the Clones. And is it just bad CGI that makes us not like those movies, or is there another reason? Right. I mean, there was even backlash on the Revenge of the Sith, and I think a lot of people think that Revenge of the Sith is a pretty good movie.
Yeah, it's my personal favorite, but definitely has some flaws, even if I'm a bit biased, considering that's one of the films I grew up with, more so than some of the others.
Right, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of, well, I mean, you're really, I guess you were probably, 3 or 4 when the Revenge of the Sith came out?
Yeah, I was a bit younger, but that's okay. I try to keep an open mind with this stuff.
Even though, how George Lucas's the prequels was rejected by some of the fans, or fan system, I totally get it. Even though they're grown-ups, and some kids might think Jar Jar is fun and silly, but grown-ups think that Jar Jar should be a little bit more serious, because they're under a serious condition there.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty silly. I agree. I mean, it's he's over the top silly.
Kids would love him. The kids would love him, and they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't really hate him unless they're really serious. But grown-ups that just thought that he was too silly and didn't have no seriousness in him.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, but why? Does Jar Jar make the Phantom Menace not canon, right? I mean, it personally is my favorite prequel. So apparently that's not, at least for me, it's not it, right?
Right. So the purpose of these laws of canon is to kind of define what fans kind of go to and what fans kind of reject when it comes to the creators and the producers putting out this content and determining what is canon despite or in alignment with what they say. So we want to do a quick rundown of the different laws that you have constructed here.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and read them, and then I'll
all right,
and I'll comment on it.
So the first law of canon is delineation. A work must clearly be declared as canon or not canon by the producers. But producers being the company putting it out. And this doesn't just apply to Star Wars. These laws of canon are really to be applied with anything, really, with any sort of media. The second law is consistency. The movie or story logic must remain consistent throughout the franchise, meaning that different facts and different established parts of the work must be explained, and if there is a change in the future, it cannot be retconned outside of the work. It must be clearly explained within the new work why there was a different interpretation. And we can get more into that a bit later. The third rule is the moral right of the fans, is that the fans ultimately have the right to decide their own canon. This is similar to kind of a headcanon, but more than that, it is supposed to be where the core group of the fandom, the diehard fans, if you will, large in part, if they are in agreement with what is good and what is wrong, that has a sway on what is canon. And then the fourth rule is the death of the author, that the design and desire of the original creator is irrelevant so long as the story is advanced and meets the criteria of the previous laws.
So, yeah, so the idea is, the idea, of course, that is trying to define the rules that apply to both the creator and any original creator and any future heirs to that. So whether that's, if we're talking Star Wars, it would be rules that would apply to Lucas and then later on to Filoni or Kathleen Kennedy or whoever, right? And why things are accepted and rejected. Right? And so if you meet these laws, you're going to be, if you can meet these criteria, then you'll be accepted, and then it's fine. And I would say that the reason why, now you have the prequels more accepted than they were back in the day is because one of the things that's true about Star Wars than other, I say this is probably true also in when it comes to like Harry Potter and things like this, is that you have fan bases that are very, very intricately involved in the details of the stories, and so if there's plot holes, they get upset. But if you give them time, they'll create, if nothing else, some headcanon to fill the holes. But in all actuality, they talk a lot, so they come up. Mm-hmm. These groups form accepted retcons for the holes that are created by stories. So that's why over time you can see something that's originally not accepted but becomes accepted. So an example would be like, the Holdo maneuver is unaccepted, right? Currently.
Right. But
let's say that the retcon that we did where we said that the Holdo maneuver is able to occur because of the trackers on the First Order ships, right? And so that becomes the accepted explanation, and explains why we haven't seen it before and why we don't see it again, right?
Right.
And why we don't see trackers being used anymore. And so if that becomes accepted, then even if they don't deal with it in any movies it means that if that becomes if all the pieces are retconned and accepted, then those pieces can be accepted as Star Wars, say, 20 years from now. Because there's been a community that's developed retroactive continuity for all the things that were breaking it between the sequel trilogy and the original trilogy, right? Well, that occurred...
Which is large in part the Pareto 20%. Is that how you pronounce it?
Right, Pareto. So you have something called the Pareto principle. And where the Pareto principle says basically 20% of the effort, 20% of the people, 20% of fans, 20% of whatever ends up with 80% of the produces 80% of the outcome, and or 80% of the results. So that means that 20% of Star Wars fans produce 80% of the profit for Star Wars. That means 20% of fans determine really what is accepted.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can hear the kids in the background.
Oh, they're fine.
They're fighting.
So a huge topic of contention amongst fans is how canon is the expanded universe, and what happens whenever George Lucas or any creator of any work decides, hey, this is established, or this is established as official canon, or it's undefined, and then fans accept that as a sort of part of the continuity, and then the creator wants to go ahead and create a different story that seems to override either a previous interpretation or a previous work. Probably one of the prime examples being Han Solo, who shot first. Originally it was just Han Solo that shot, and all the fans had their interpretation of this, and it allowed them to view Han Solo in a specific way. And then the creator goes back later and touches it up and ultimately changes something, which is Han Solo doesn't shoot first. He shoots after Greedo, and that a lot of people believe that changes his character from being a little bit less cold-blooded and more pure of heart, I think.
Right.
So to bringing this back around, how do we determine when the creator goes back and changes things, or if something's believed to be established when it's established that something else happened?
So, all right, what do you want to say?
Talking about Solo, do you think there's ever going to be a second movie to be continued with the movie Solo about Kira? I don't know what her name is, but it starts with K. The new bad guy from the Crimson Dawn. Do you think she's going to be the new bad guy, and he's going to have to compete with his ex-girlfriend? I don't think they ever broke up in the movie, but I think they're already broke up.
First of all, I don't know necessarily where this falls in the timeline. How long is Solo between Solo and A New Hope? Like, how many years?
I think it's about 10 years.
Okay. Well, I think it's not unreasonable for them to continue that story in some facet. I don't think it's going to be a film. I think most likely, if they're going to be continuing stuff from that storyline, it's going to be in books and comics and stuff like that. Or if it is going to be a film, it's going to be way back there on their list. Just large in part because the response to Solo was, shall we say, underwhelming. I will say I'm interested in seeing what they'll do with like Maul and with Kira. We obviously know Maul's fate now thanks to Rebels, and we know where Han Solo ends up, obviously. So I don't think it's necessarily a story that has to be told in film, because I think everyone already knows what's going to happen later. So I don't think it has to be told in film. I think it can be told somewhere else, and I think it's likely to be told somewhere else. But if the question is, will they conclude that story? I think most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, So I think to get back to it, we think we're having a lot of pieces of canon get shifted around, or at least intended to be canon. I mean, like the story in the EU is much different than the story. I mean, I won't say it's much different, but it's played out differently, and I think much more fully as far as the Han Solo's backstory.
Yeah.
And so I think those pieces are important in developing that. And it's kind of a shame that they overrid it with Solo. But to go back to where you were talking about with the who shot first, right? And does a creator have the right to go back and change it? So, I think ultimately most fans at that time rejected it, but there was a period of time where the only thing you could buy was him shooting first, right? And so unless you had the original cut or something like that, then as a kid that's all you saw. So that became what was accepted to you, and so this goes to show you how that 20% changes, and that's that moral right aspect, right? Mm-hmm. So the moral right. I mean, original OT fans don't have to like it. They may have rejected the prequels. They may have rejected the special editions in '97 and their updates, in the 2000s. But the truth of it is that the fan base has moved with them, and they're not as populous as the other ones are now. So as that 20% shifts, and it does shift, then what is accepted as canon is also going to shift. And that's kind of part of where that moral principle is. So it means that, but you need to know your audience. So I think like what we're experiencing right now, for example, is the question is, do you make it for the audience that you have now, or do you make it for the audience that's coming? And because like I think that had Lucas not changed everything, and you had a happy OT fans with the prequels and with the special editions, like he just didn't make those unnecessary changes. Like, one, he would have avoided a lot of controversy, and two, you would have a fan base that's in line with a new fan base that's in line with the old fan base. I think when you do this, you create this tension that doesn't need to be there.
Right, and the danger is also there whenever he went back and created the prequels at all. Creating prequels for anything can be dangerous, just because when the OT was told, people had their own interpretations of how the story played out, how the backstory played out with Obi-Wan, with Vader, with the fall of the Republic and the Jedi Knights, and for Lucas to then go and create the prequels, which I believe he had every right to do that, but that then defined what people were supposed to believe, and a lot of fans did not like that.
I agree with you.
But in regards to the EU, there's this sort of paradox that I have, and it's where I believe if George Lucas allows for the EU to exist, and he does give insight on different projects, and everything does to some degree have to go through Lucas to be approved as a part of the expanded universe. If he allows something to be established, I believe that should then be fully committed or considered as canon, and that he himself then must adhere to that. If he's allowing something to persist, he has to adhere to that. Now, in the case of Timothy Zahn and the stuff that he established in the Thrawn trilogy in regards to the prequels, I don't think that George had to be beholden to that, specifically because George had said, don't touch anything in the prequel era in terms of cloning. Now, granted, this is another example of George changing his mind. Zahn based all of his cloning information and dates off of what George had said, which was about that the Clone Wars took place about 50 or so years before the events of the original trilogy, which of course is changed later with the prequels, and George decided it would be about 20 19 years between episode 3 and episode 4.
All right. So I personally disagree with you. That I think that if he gave input onto it and it established it as what was to be, because so like when you first, Thrawn is the first really set of EU novels that come out that really establish what's gone on beyond Return of the Jedi, right? Mm-hmm. And inside that, it's based off of what's going to happen in there's some aspects that he's pulling from George's own outlines, George's own notes, input from George as to when and what happened during the Clone Wars, right?
Right.
So there was a clear aspect where we have this clone of a Jedi and Joruus C'baoth or C'baoth, however you want to say his name.
C'baoth.
And so we have this clone Jedi. So it kind of established this idea that the Jedi even cloned themselves, and then it led to tremendous disaster, right? And so Thrawn, this Thrawn trilogy, Zahn, developed was based off of a lot of notes and things that Lucas gave him. In my opinion, because that was based off his ideas, it now set that in stone. So Lucas was beholden to that, and that's part of. I mean that series was loved by Star Wars fans and those books got bought up like crazy, and they brought a lot of fans waited. They couldn't wait for the things that were implied in that trilogy. I mean, people could not wait for the clone that Clone Wars to be developed in the prequels, right?
Right.
So a lot of things that were just really just not covered, and George had input in, and he did not declare these clearly to people. Like, he may have stated to authors that, hey, I reserve the right to accept or reject anything that you write.
Right.
There was no place in that on those books. Like, if you open the book up, it didn't say on the beginning, this is not George Lucas canon. This is allowed by George Lucas, but George Lucas doesn't consider this real Star Wars. Right. What?
So if you look at Thrawn's eyes, it looks like he has a really bad pink eye.
That's very true. He's described as blue, the chiss as a chiss, and they are blue and with red eyes.
And it also looks like he's freezing up cold when you look at his skin, sort of.
Yes, like he's really cold. I guess he could be like a frozen zombie.
Or he's getting choked.
Yeah.
You could sometimes turn blue when you're choked.
That's true. You can hold your breath till you turn blue. I think you kind of turn purple more than
blue. Well, I definitely have to agree with you.
Well, maybe he has a sister that's purple.
Oh.
You good there?
No. So yes, I mean, I think that's the part of the delineation, though. That's right. That's the first part of delineation. You can't. There's the first part is you can't confuse your audience, right? You can't tell them one thing is canon and then say it's not canon a few minutes later, because as soon as you do that, they get confused and they start because they accept something as the storyline and then they reject it, right?
Right.
And,
so that goes to the first law of canon. It has to be clearly declared canon or non-canon. And in this case, it wasn't specifically declared one way or another. And because of that, by default, the fans just accepted that. They're like, it's Star Wars. This is the story. Okay, we'll accept it. And, just currently reading the Heir to the Empire, the original copy, internal flap, it speaks about continuing the story started by George Lucas, his stunning vision. Heir to the Empire begins 5 years after the Return of the Jedi. And really, it just built upon the story. And obviously, I wasn't alive back then, but, I believe that fans accepted that as canon. They're like, this is the story. Okay, I accept it without giving it too much of a second thought. And then, of course, later on, there would be contradictions. Then that's where the discussions really start about what is canon. Whereas, different works that are a bit more coherent. I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan of that. I don't know much about the world But from what I understand, Tolkien wrote the books, and the books are held up to be the truest form of the canon, and there's no disputing that because he himself established all of that lore. He himself established all of that in the works in a consistent manner.
Right.
And,
I mean, the only thing he didn't finish. I mean, I think is unfinished. He had the unfinished tales, and then he had the Silmarillion, and those were both completed by his son. But his son meticulously poured through his nose. I mean, his intent was to take the knowledge that he had from his conversations with his father, and the notes that his father left behind, and meticulously piece together the remainder of his stories. Right. So while Tolkien didn't necessarily finish those, they were distinctly his works, right?
So you're saying his son has a bloody nose?
No, we're not saying that. I don't get what you're saying.
You said something's like pouring out of his nose.
No, I didn't. I said he's pouring over his works.
It sounded like you said something's like pouring out of the son's nose, and I thought it was a bloody nose.
No, not to say that at all.
Sorry, I get confused.
Well, if nothing else, you're definitely adding comedy to our discussion.
Yes, it's my part in the role. It's gonna be my part in this role, and I might interrupt in some of your conversations when one of y'all guys are done. And when I think of something, I will say it.
Maybe we're talking a little bit above your head.
Yep.
I mean, we are just talking about fiction, though, right? It's like it's not like it's super
but I'm just adding some comedy.
Yeah.
Y'all guys seem too serious, so I want to add some comedy.
Well, he's Darth Revan. He's always serious.
Yes, he's always serious. Wait, shouldn't he
I don't know.
be like somewhere else going to kill his master or something he can be master?
I believe that Revan actually had quite a sense of humor. Some of those dialogue options in KOTOR, and then HK-47 saying meatbag. I mean,
wait, I got a question. Did you cut anybody's fingers off during your battles?
I cut lots of people's fingers off.
It's almost impossible not to when you're fighting with lightsabers, right? Because it's like where you hit whack, ow!
It's like when we were playing with toy lightsabers and we accidentally hit our fingers and hands. It was like, ow!
Quite so.
Like, I don't get it why they don't aim for the fingers in Star Wars. If they aim for the fingers, then they can't hold it, and they just be running around like chickens.
Yeah, they run around with no fingers. That's true. And they never hit each other in the hands.
Through the
you
saber.
never notice that.
Yeah, but actually, like, do you notice how they use the Force? They use their hands to do that.
Fingers, right?
They use their fingers.
So if they had no fingers, they couldn't use the Force.
Yeah, and then that would be an easy catch.
So now we know how to defeat a Jedi. Just cut off his fingers.
Yeah.
Cut off the
fingers. Problem solved.
So they get a
problem solved for you guys.
We figured out the one tactic that nobody's figured out in 4,000 years.
Yeah, because they don't think. They don't think before they go into battle, and they don't think about strategies what their weaknesses is.
Nobody thinks about strategy in Star Wars, ever.
No, they just go out for it and be dumb and stupid and die.
That's right. So why do we love this series if no one thinks and it's all dumb and stupid?
I don't know,
no one thinks about anything.
So you don't love Star Wars anymore?
I still do, but it's still stupid.
No, it's not stupid.
There we go.
There we go. From
Let's quote that.
I love it, but it's stupid.
Yeah, like the boys in my class are dumb. They don't think before they do actions.
That I can believe.
So the next part.
Yeah.
So the next is continuity, right? So the idea of continuity is that continuity is actually the most important part of a storytelling. All right.
Yep.
So you cannot break the piece that makes somebody question the logic of a story. So the stories get, whether it's a movie, a book, or a video game, everything's got to flow. You got to be able to logically immerse yourself into the world that exists. You got to understand the rules that exist in that world, and then based off those rules, be able to make decisions. Like, there's a reason why you can't cut people's fingers off, right? We don't know that, but it's never happened, so there must be a reason, right?
Well, yeah, true. But about logic, every time I watch Gotcha Life videos, logic gets thrown out the window, and that's probably why they don't cut off fingers.
Right.
Cause
I have no idea what Gotcha Life has to do with this conversation.
Yeah, because they throw logic out the window, and there's legit no logic in there.
But
okay. But that's nothing to do with Star Wars.
in different films and in different shows in different worlds that throw traditional logic out the window, that's then what you expect. The rule is then that that logic is out the window.
Right. So
but
it's established.
In a world that takes itself seriously, you don't expect people to, be really, like you said, silly. And,
right.
I wonder if this is an issue that some people have with Kaz and Resistance, is people don't expect people to be, or these characters to be quite as silly, to be quite as dumb.
Right. I mean,
so
I think that's the issue with Jar Jar. I mean, Kaz is no different in that sense. It's like there's an expectation that they're somewhat real, even though they're aliens, even though we know they're CGI creations or
right.
animation. The idea is we're immersing ourselves into a world where mostly the rules that we live with exist.
Like a world that doesn't cut other people's fingers off.
Yeah, I don't
right.
know why you keep
our rules.
I don't know.
This world's rules are what stand unless altered in the universe, and then once it's altered and once it's established, that is then believed by the audience, and that must then be held to by the creators.
Right. So there's got to be a way for these characters who are nonsensical to have survived.
Yeah.
And so if that stretches credulity, then then there's a tendency to reject them, because it really is actually a break of the continuity, because you've established the continuity as something that's fairly serious. There's certain rules, and you're breaking the rules with these characters, and the result is a
right.
rejection. So
no,
go ahead.
Okay. So my question then would be, what happens if a rule or perhaps a character's development is implied and or at least suggested by perhaps a certain character to be truth? You then believe what that character says to be truth. So for example, let's take Obi-Wan Kenobi explaining the Force in episode 4. The way he explains the Force, we take that to be truth, right?
Right.
That's the way it's intended to be. What if a sort of work comes later that says Obi-Wan Kenobi was incorrect? This is actually how it works, coming from a character or a source that is supposed to be more believable. Say the Wills, which theoretically are the ones that control the Force. They tell us that nope, Obi-Wan Kenobi was incorrect and his interpretation is wrong. So what happens there?
Well, maybe they say he was correct from a certain point of view, right?
Well, that would be the ideal situation, but to the point where they do not address the previous interpretations, where they just completely external from Obi-Wan tell us something completely different, but we are supposed to believe it.
Right. I think that any, let's say they don't address Obi-Wan himself, but let's say that this disconnect, this portion where it seems like there's a disconnect, right? So the example would be where that happens. Obi-Wan tells, Luke in 4 that Darth Vader killed his father, right? And then
right.
and then we're faced with, no, I am your father, right?
Right.
So those are two incongruous pieces of information. So the same thing would be true with the Wills, and that means that at some point there's got to be an explanation to explain why Obi-Wan or Yoda misunderstood the way the Force really works, right?
Well, actually,
right.
I think Obi-Wan got confused about Darth Vader and his father, even though Anakin was his father.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was trying to say, but it came out wrong, and he forgot about it. And
I don't think he forgot.
Well, I think he became confused.
I don't think he got confused either.
Let's not talk about that. But I think
he straight up lied to Luke.
Yeah,
I
but
think
actually,
that's the case.
his father got destroyed by the dark side, and that's what they were trying to say, but he actually lied.
I mean, I guess it's possible, since we don't know, that maybe Ahsoka and Obi-Wan had a conversation, or maybe Obi-Wan had a conversation with him since, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there was a part where they meet elsewhere, and he says, he calls him Anakin, to which Vader responds, "Anakin's dead. I've killed him," and then that's something that Obi-Wan accepts as an explanation. That's possible. I mean, the point of view, argument.
Well, if you see, like, was that Clone Wars where we saw Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Anakin? Like, they all looked real young.
Yes, they are very young in that.
Yeah, and when you look in the movie A New Hope,
there's no Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan's really old.
Yeah, Obi-Wan has really gray hair.
White, actually.
White hair, grayish white.
Right.
Who cares? But he looks old. He has a beard. He doesn't do anything. I don't think so, except catch fish. I think like
he's not catching fish. He's on Tatooine.
I know.
So
all right. So let me finish some stuff off, because we only got 5 minutes left. And
okay.
So for quick aspects, so continuity is important for the characters, and then we talked about the Pareto principle with the moral right. So the idea is this: is that really knowing the audience is important. I mean, there's ways that you can craft a story that won't create any contention and will build the story, but of course Star Wars hasn't done that, right? And it appears that another story, with Harry Potter is kind of going down that same route. So, but if writers, whether they are the creator or whether they are future writers and people adding to the story, if they pay attention to what has come before, and it gets more and more difficult as more and more pieces of Star Wars or Harry Potter or other things come out, it becomes more and more difficult to keep that continuity together. So I mean, that's kind of the purpose of a story group, right? That they're going to keep the idea. They're the cultivators of knowledge. They're the curators of the story. And so the idea is that it all has to align, because all of us will get together and have these long conversations about where this fits into canon timeline, or what force power do they use, or how do they do that? What does that mean? Does that violate balance? Is that the dark side or the light side? And we'll work it all out, right?
Right.
And all these pieces have got to go. But if you can keep the continuity together, so if you can follow the first two, one, it's declared canon. Second, it stays continuous with what came before it. Then you're going to meet those two pieces, and so then ultimately you keep that 20% happy.
Yeah.
And that 20% will actually influence the attitudes and views really of a good portion of your other fan group. But that 20% is the diehard, and really you can even go deeper than that and say the 4% of that is really, really your diehard. So if you can find your 4% and keep that 4% happy, then you're going to control more than half of the fan group, and they will influence the others. So you may have some group that rejects it, but really eventually even that 20% will come back, because there's the 20% that's your diehards and they want to love it, and so you may lose some of them. The idea is to grow. If you're trying to grow a fan base, you grow your 20%. That's where you focus, right? And if you can focus really hardcore on that, find that 4% and really focus on them, then you'll ultimately grow it. If you can grow that 4%, you by extension grow the 20%, and by extension you grow your overall fan base. Yeah. And so what's the last? And then the last piece of that canon is after that is the death of the author. So the idea is this: that with the death of the author this is your basic explanation of death of the author, is that really once somebody has written what they're going to write, it's really no longer up to their interpretation. It is the way that it is expressed. So it's really up to the interpretation of the viewer or the reader. And again, like I talked about, we will all talk about different things, and we will come up with a a consensus of what it is. And so it's no longer what the author intended is no longer valid. It's what we as a group in consensus come to accept.
Yeah.
So if you go against that, and that's again why the author, whether he is the original creator or not, has to be aware of what his fan base loves. And so if you're going to change it, it means that you're going to have to explain why that change has occurred. And so some sort of exposition, some sort of story-based visual change is going to be incorporated to explain how you got from A to B. And then that interpretation becomes our interpretation, and because as we watch it, we understand why we misperceived it in the beginning, and that allows us to come along, and that means that 20% stays happy, which means most everybody will stay happy as well. And we've also filled the portions of it's declared canon, it's continuous, and the 20% has come to agree, and they've spread happiness and harmony through the rest of the group because they didn't revolt, and then that leads to then they form their own interpretations again. So now the author or the new author or the original creator's got to kind of revamp where we are and figure out where he is, and this is the process of creation. It's how did my fan base respond to it? What do they love about it? What do they think about it? And understanding that is really the key. And we're in a day and age now where that is more important than ever. We have the ability to produce our own content, say what we think, and so there's really a point in time now which didn't exist in the 80s, and even though it did exist somewhat in the 90s, it's more prevalent now where there's more of a chance for a creator to put his finger in the air and understand what is understood. Now, so this is important. It's not that a writer has to write what we expect. It's that they understand what we think and what we like. And so that if there's something that's going to deviate from what we think is something, what we think is continuity, that there's an explanation to explain how we got a change. So that example of your wills, the wills is possible, but there's got to be some sort of explanation along the way that's going to give us the ability to accept what the will said over what Obi-Wan said.
So what happens whenever an explanation is not offered?
Well, then you're not going to bring along that 20%, and it's going to be rejected, right?
Yeah.
And so the reason being is because there's already something established, right?
Mm-hmm. So,
what?
Never mind. I forgot.
All right, so
I would like to say one final thing before we close. Is I believe when an author creates a work and publishes it, then if it's a good work and the author did a good job on it, it will sort of take a life of its own, and people will get things from it that the author never intended for them to get from it, both good and bad, both in line with what the author thought and what they did not. And if it's really good, I even believe that the author can learn new things even from stuff that they wrote, get different perspectives as they grow and look back on the work that they've created and say, wow, that's something that I hadn't thought of, but that I can get from this work, just looking back over it. Different themes, different ways of looking at things. It sort of takes a life of its own. And part of that is just, like you said, consistency. And why do we discuss canon? Why do we discuss all this stuff? It's really because I believe it's the realism is to deviate from canon breaks that immersion. To break these rules breaks immersion. And if you break immersion, then you can't take it seriously. The myth, the story loses its value. And that's why we discuss this, is because it's real to us in a sense. It takes a life of its own.
Also, I remember what I was gonna say. So when you grow, so like me and a magic maker, we first started our channel. We were really small, and we're still working on getting big, and we're still growing. We're at 290 something.
No, we're 301 as of today.
Oh, we are?
Yeah, we crossed 300. Congratulations for us! Yay!
Congratulations.
And also, like when we make our content, we could when we post our content onto YouTube or something, and the creator of Star Wars looks at our content, it could inspire them and get an idea of what we like, and they could
just like their stuff can inspire us, right?
Yeah. So and they could make something that inspires us, and it would be like a cycle, and we'd start loving it, and they'd start loving ours.
Right, but that's true. That's kind of like the what I was talking about with getting understanding where the fan base is and understanding what they're creating. And I mean, because let's be honest, only the 20%, someone in the 20% is going to create fan fiction. You know, I mean, so understanding what and the thing is like what we also have to accept. You know, like many of us don't like Reylos, right? I mean, many of us have rejected that. But if people are writing Reylo fan fiction, if they're writing, or drawing Reylo pictures, and that's something that they love, well, guess what? They're part of the 20%, and so it's important to understand where they are in that 20%, right? And remember, we're not just trying to get into the 20%, we're trying to get into the 4%, and you're trying to really, really dig down. Now, I don't know if Reylos are 4% or if we're part of the 4%. I just don't have a good handle on the numbers. And but the point of it is that it is their job to know it. And if I was receiving fan emails or fan letters, which I'm sure George did, and I'm sure that Disney does now, Lucasfilm does now, it's really important to get a handle on what your fan base thinks, and especially that 20 and that 4%, and inside of that, understand what that really means, so that you know not that we want to cater. You're not trying to cater per se. What you're trying to do is understand how you're going to maintain continuity with them, and so that's just the final piece. But anyway, I'm gonna let Vega have the last word, and then we will. Vega will have the last word before Revan says goodbye, and then we'll finish this out. So go ahead.
All right.
So it's what we talked about. You know, what I said before. It's like the circle of life in the Lion King. I wanted to sing it so much, but I was like, should I say it or sing it? So I said sing it.
Well, I guess there is kind of a circle of life to it, because there is a death of, you have to accept that it's out there and you have to let it go. So with every story, there's a letting it go. I mean, the one issue I think that George had a problem with in his process was letting Star Wars go, for us to create our own thoughts on it.
Let it go.
Yeah.
Let it go.
So anyway, with that, I'll let you finish off at the last comment.
Yep. Well, yep. I think I'd like to just say thank you for having me on. I look forward to doing the council in the future. And yep, it's been great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming on, and we look forward to having Darth Revan again on the I don't know what we'll call it, the alliance of Star Wars fans, maybe, as we review The Mandalorian. We're going to try to bring him on, and several other huge characters from Star Wars, and both old and new. And we look forward to having you all in the future, and may the Force be with you, and goodbye.
Or with me.